You have an idea. You want to tell it to the world, but you don't know where to start. That's where Anchor comes in. They have the tools for you to edit, produce, and record your idea right from your phone or computer. It's the easiest way to reach and grow your audience. They publish for you to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all major platforms. And to top it all off, they match you with advertisers so you can earn from your passion and your wonderful idea. So tell me, what are you waiting for? Download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started and follow your dream. Welcome to Disruptive Adventism. My name is Jose Briones, and I'll be your host for this podcast. This podcast is about discussing the polemical statements and practices that are part of the Adventist fabric, which in turn shape this belief system to be unique and relevant for today's society. Welcome back, everyone, to Disruptive Adventism. Thank you for listening in. Thank you for tuning in. Our topic for today is the topic of diversity and why is it so important. We are in our series of Black History Month, and we thought that this topic will be very, very important, especially from a perspective of including different thoughts and different cultural backgrounds within our church. So we have invited Philip Warfield to be with us and to discuss this important topic. How's it going, Phil?
Doing pretty well. Thanks for having me on the show.
Thanks. It's our pleasure, that you're taking some of the time to, kind of discuss this very, very important topic. So let's get started,
Cool.
Before we start, though, before we get deep into the topic, let's get a little bit of background from you. Where are you from? What are you doing right now? And what's the future looking like?
Great. Well, okay. So like you said, my name is Philip Warfield. I am an African American. The really funny thing about me is that when people ask me where I'm from, I can never really tell them. I've lived in 8 different states in only 22 years. Currently, I'm still a student. I'm a student at Southern Adventist University still. What I'm studying is history. I'm a history major. And right now I'm working on a couple of minors. We'll see what happens when I graduate here pretty soon. But yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Well, thanks for kind of letting us know that. So you said 8 states?
Yes.
Give me the rundown.
Sure. Okay. In no particular order: Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Louisiana, Michigan, Tennessee, Florida, and Pennsylvania.
Wow, that's a lot. That's a lot to cover. South and
Yes.
and Northwest, Midwest, and all of that. Mm-hmm. Well, that's good. That's good. You have a lot of diversity within the states that you have visited and probably interacted with different people.
Definitely.
So that's awesome to know. Now, well, let's get started kind of on our topic. And tell me, what's diversity to you?
Wow. So diversity to me is just appreciating the differences between people, understanding that more connects us than separates us. That's the power of diversity. The definition of the word itself, though, I feel like I need to think about that. It's almost like saying variety. I don't mean to throw back a synonym with another word, but I would just say differences and varieties.
Okay, differences and varieties in everything that we do.
Everything, because not just talking about cultural diversity, but in anything. When you say diversity in general, you're talking about different kinds of insert here.
Right, and there are different levels as well.
Right.
So tell me, why is it important that we live a diverse life, per se?
Absolutely. So our world is more global, if you will, than it ever has been before. We are more connected than we have been before. So with that, we are understanding that different groups of people come from all over anywhere in our country. We're even having that particular issue. So diversity is one of those things that it opens up the everyday mind to all kinds of different cultures that a lot of people in the past in history were never able to have. They were relegated to one particular place. Diversity is, we have to be able to understand each other, and especially within our church context, if we're going to lead all of these people, we're going to help lead them to God. And when he comes back, there's going to be a whole lot of different people, and it's not just going to be one culture over the other.
You started mentioning, and kind of you brought it up, this idea of diversity within the church. Mm-hmm. How does that look like in your life
And how have you seen it work in different contexts?
For sure. So I will just go ahead and say this. I am probably the first of my family that didn't start, if you will, freshman year in college by going to Oakwood University. I'm the first one that didn't. And so with that, because of my time in 8 different states, I've been around so many different groups of people from throughout the country. So our church in New Mexico looks different than it does in Miami, Florida. Sometimes that's just because of the people who worship there. They consider some things that are different, or they consider some things more liberal or conservative, and leadership is slightly different. For example, it's almost like the more west you go, the more liberal you go, some people would want to say. Kind of works just like that. I've also been able to be both in regional conferences and what we call state conferences, to be frank, black and white conferences. And what that looks like, I've just kind of always been that middle person.
It's very interesting that you kind of talk about that. And I guess, like, you know, most of your family went to Oakwood. Mm-hmm. So that's diverse in and of itself. Like, you know, there's a lot of cultures that come together at Oakwood. Of course, it's predominantly a historically black institution. So, right. You know, but it's not only for, you know, the African-American student, but there are other people that go there. Mm-hmm. And I have visited there. So it's really amazing to see that there's diversity even there. At Southern, you know, as well. I mean, you will think, oh, well, you know, as in the South, probably mostly white people will be there. But there are, you know, different groups. Of course, there's always a predominant group. And I mean, that's kind of expected. If you go to, for example, a university in Asia, well, you know, you're kind of expecting a certain demographic to hit the majority per se. Sure. But talking about this majority and minority, like, you know, you talked about Oakwood and a little bit of like the diverse backgrounds that you have kind of integrated in. What have you learned in your experiences with diverse backgrounds or church cultures? How has it shaped you?
Well, I've learned that just because somebody doesn't worship the way I do, or they don't find that my music is great, or whatever it is, all of those things are valued. They should be valued. A lot of it for me was also understanding that all people, to me, are diverse. Everybody has a story. So that means if you're black, to me, it's not just stopping at you're black. So you could be African American. You could be from Bermuda. You could be Caribbean American, any of those things, West African, all of those things play into what it means to be black. It's just an umbrella. So I like to help people understand that we are all we have distinct backgrounds, and we need to understand how that works. For me, that's kind of my biggest passion. My experiences through these different places have shaped who I am, and I've taken a little bit of chili from Texas, a green chili from New Mexico, Mardi Gras and king cake, if you will, from New Orleans, Louisiana, and the list goes on. All of those things have created who I am.
As I listen to the different things that you kind of have acquired, you know, so it seems that you yourself have kind of been morphed into kind of like this different, you're not just necessarily just African American, but you like you said, you're an African American with a story that encompasses these different states and different cultures and different kind of like demographics that you have been around, and they all shape you. So I really kind of appreciate that you're saying that, because I guess you cannot always put yourself in one box, but you maybe hit half this box here, maybe another box here, like, you know, not for like form purposes per se, but like it's just not all encompassing when we see a checkbox and that says you're Hispanic.
Yes, truly, at the end of the day, what I hate for people to just be able to click is, oh, I'm just black, or I'm just white. Where's your story? I like to tell this story as a historian, if you will. When white people came, a lot of them from Europe, about 100 years ago, we had some of the largest immigration into Ellis Island. And let's say, for example, somebody with a name like Dirk Nowitzki or something, he would come here and they would immediately say, your name isn't American enough. Let's call you David Noah or something. And boom, just like that, we have a bunch of Noah families and Smith families and all of these common names. And people don't understand. They're just like, oh, well, at the end of the day, I'm just white. But I'm like, well, wait, weren't you German like 100 years ago? Let's talk about that. Let's unwrap that. That's your story. That's what makes you a multicultural person. And we're getting more and more of that today, and people don't understand how that works in our society.
So to a certain degree, you're saying that going back to the roots is very important. And of course, you're in history, so it's kind of like you love history and you like to interact with that. Do you think that that kind of contributed to a certain idea of uniformity within the United States fabric? And I mean, that also happens in the church as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So like I just said, the people at Ellis Island were like, your name isn't insert here enough, American enough, or frankly, American white enough. We need to make it work for us. We need to be able to say it easily for us. So let's change that. With that, especially we look into our church, Black music, for example, gospel music, jazz, those kinds of things. People are just like, well, that'll work maybe if you sing some hymns, or let's just reserve that for AY service or something afterwards. Let's go back to the hymns. And people don't realize that those things are, at the end of the day, a little bit Eurocentric, to say that the piano is more powerful than the drums, for example, and going back and forth between those two. That's kind of the state of, I feel like, our church when it comes to worshiping in either conference.
When I think about what you're saying, especially when it comes to the comment that you made, to kind of distinction in between like the Eurocentric value, you're speaking more of a white American, or is that Europe today? A lot of people kind of get hung up on the term Eurocentric, so I kind of want you to kind of expand on that, because it doesn't necessarily mean that it will reflect Europe today, Eurocentric, whereas you may be meaning something else. So I want you to kind of clarify.
Sure. Let me unpack that a little bit. So Eurocentric to me is talking about throughout the 1,000 years of European dominance in world history, we have people who make decisions and decide what things are more important than the other. Let's just say classical music, for example. Let's go to Beethoven and Mozart and all of them. People found that to be highbrow music. So that is going to be the standard. Those things just stayed throughout our culture. The Puritans and everybody who came from Europe and came to the United States said, okay, we're going to establish that as the culture. That is the number one. And so with that, all the things that come with that, which also includes being anti-Islam, anything that is considered un-Western European Christian is considered the other and cannot be accepted. And so I may not say that that's Europe today, because Europe is also having some really intense problems with even Islam and refugees and all of those things. And so they are trying to figure out their identity. But as America figures out its identity, so is the Adventist Church, so is even our sports is trying to figure out what is right and what is not. NBA, basketball is one of those big examples for me. But yeah.
I thank you for clarifying and for kind of explaining a little bit more of what you're meaning. And, well, one example that you put is kind of like, well, the Christian tradition is so strong and kind of, it was prevalent and may not be as prevalent today. We're in a very pluralistic age, and maybe that's intimidating for a lot of people, to a certain degree. And a lot of people say like the Eastern question, for example, the Eastern versus the Western kind of idea. But what's kind of the solution that, you will propose in order to kind of include all of these ideas, all of these thoughts that are coming from different backgrounds, not necessarily European, Christian, Western backgrounds, without diminishing the European, Christian, Western background? Because when we're talking about diversity, we don't want to just say, well, you've been dominating for 1,000 years. And it's our time now to change and to flip and, well, kind of perpetuate something that we don't want to, which is, certain groups of people have been oppressed for certain amounts of time, but we don't want to flip the question. And I think that a lot of people are hung on that. Like they kind of have that fear. So what will be the solution that you think, through your experience or things that you have seen, can start to better, the situation that we're in right now.
Definitely. That actually reminds me of something that I don't know if I'm the first one to call it this, but I call it the Killmonger mentality. That is something that I got from the Black Panther movie. Mm-hmm. Some of you guys have seen it. In which Killmonger, his plan is to take over, the world and rid it of the colonizers, aka the white people who have taken over. So it's time, your time, blacks, to take over everything, and it's your time to rule. But of course, Killmonger is defeated. And if you think about it, what was his long-standing plan? He got rid of all the things that made the Black Panther what he was. So what was going to happen? It wasn't going to be stable. It felt like history was just going to repeat itself for the next 1,000 years. So where's the plan? I think that that's something that we are all still trying to figure out. But for me personally, with all the things that I have learned from all of these different cultures, I find what is the most useful thing to do is to create dialogues. And not only about some of the really hard things in our church or anything else, but sometimes I like to call myself a pop culture historian. So I'm like, okay, what do we see happening in our media right now in which we can be a little bit more inclusive? I've done this before, and somebody raised their hand and said, wow, well, there's a whole lot of white people all on the news on this one TV channel. I said, okay, great. Now let's get somebody who is Black, Hispanic, Latin American, Asian, Pacific Islander, etc., and puts them, not, immediately just saying, you get a free position, but let's have them share what they think something is on another topic that may not be the same mindset as everybody else around them. We have to do more of that. We have to include more of that. If we don't, I feel as though everything will repeat. So dialogue, yes, and having really a person at all of these workplaces, these corporations, that says, this may not be correct in the way that we're treating these groups of people, and we need to be bridge makers. How can we unite these two different groups of people?
So bringing somebody to the table is kind of like a first step, to the table of discussion, and maybe giving them that platform to speak.
Sure.
And of course that I think I've seen it work as well, because it helps people to say like, okay, my opinion is actually valued. It's not like, oh, we value your opinion, but we never give you a time to project that opinion, to say, even if you disagree with me. I mean, that's part of the diverse process. How are you? I mean, you had some involvement at Southern, with the student association. How do you see that kind of play at Southern's campus? Will you like to kind of expand on that?
Sure. So, little known fact, but Southern Adventist University is in a 3-way tie for the most diverse university in the entire American South. That's a fact that not a lot of people know. But I really wanted to make it more apparent when I was Student Association President, helping these people realize that more connects us than separates us. And sometimes the very first thing that you need to do in order to get to know somebody else is to say, hey, have you ever tried my kind of food before? Have I tried yours before? Let's have a conversation about culture over some dinner, some diverse dinner. And so at Southern, you'll see that we have all kinds of different cultural events that happen all the time, which are fantastic. But some of these groups have really, really taken that and ran with it. It's not necessarily just about one single, for example, Latin American club night anymore. It's about a culture. It's about a family. And these are moments where you should come and feel free to ask those questions. Because the thing is about higher education, and especially in a place like this, if you do not engage in conversation with somebody who isn't like you right now, you will be stuck in your mindset for the rest of your life. It's just going to happen if you don't expose yourself right now. So with my platform as the president of all of these students, red, yellow, black, and white, I felt as though I'm going to really run with this thing and invite people to get to know each other and ask the really tough questions about each other, about our institution's history, and what we can do about it right now.
That's really good. And I think that kind of starts a process that, I can definitely say that it's a scary process, to kind of go and experiment something that you haven't experimented before. I personally, I come from a monocultural background. per se, to a certain degree. You know, I'm from Nicaragua, and most of our are Latin, and we identify with that. But something that's very interesting that has changed in my country, which is, I mean, I guess I experienced my country through a monocultural lens, even though it was quite diverse. In the North, you know, where I'm from, most people kind of came from a European descent. But in the Pacific, there were a lot of indigenous people. And in the Atlantic, there were a lot of Afro-Latinos. So it was very interesting that I personally kind of experienced through a silo, even though within my own country, we had so many diverse peoples.
Absolutely.
And I think that can occur at any point and at any level. So, for example, I personally do not remember having interactions with, I knew they were there.
They existed.
I knew they existed, as in, I'm speaking about the Afro-Latinos, right? But because certain kind of factors of traveling and transportation, they are, I wouldn't say relegated, but they have kind of like their own zone. And by they, I'm not trying to be,
right.
What's the word? I'm not trying to be despective from someone that is of a different complexion than I am. But I'm saying that's how we treated them at this point. And we had this and I think language, it's a part of how we develop diversity as well. So I think this has been ingrained in my brain. Like, you know, I'm kind of reflecting right now to say they and us. Like, you know, I think that's kind of a negative approach that I'm kind of reflecting right now as I'm speaking. But my brothers and sisters, let's put it that way. I guess that's more inclusive language, and I guess that really helps. But my brothers and sisters from the Caribbean coast, and that's how we call it, I never had interactions with them in real life.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until I came to the United States that I started to have interactions with Afro-Latinos, African Americans, and African culture as a whole. I knew they were there. I knew my brothers and sisters were there. Man, it's really hard, like, you know, to kind of get rid of that language. But I knew my people, my fellow Nicaraguans were there. It's just that I never interacted. I never took the step to go out and kind of seek the community. Yes. And I think that's also the example of many people in America. Yes. That there are people that are diverse or different from you, but it's really hard to take the first step.
That's right. A lot of people are just afraid. They're afraid of being treated like the other. And I will say, for some of my white friends, they get scared because they're like, Phil, I really just want to learn about your culture. I want to be able to ask those awkward questions like, how do you do your hair like that? Or do you like basketball? Or do you enjoy fried chicken, Kool-Aid, and watermelon? Can I just like hear why those stereotypes exist? And it takes some of us to have to be patient and have to explain those things, because that's someone who wants to be there and wants to understand and wants to listen. But sometimes a lot of us get very frustrated, feeling like we have to take on the entire race. We have to be the representative, if you will, when sometimes that isn't the case. Sometimes people just need to have this conversation. They want to learn. I have had friends who are Latin American even, and they're just like, hey, Phil, I'm a darker complexion. My people confuse me for black all the time. Am I considered an Afro-Latino? Can we talk about that? This is new evolving concepts as we learn more about our history, more about our roots, and understand how Europeans and African slaves and indigenous peoples of the Americas all coexisted together. But it's, for some reason, in 2019, these are new concepts still. So we're still working through it.
It's really interesting. And I think it's mainly because of the education sector. I think that at first, it may not be your fault that you may not be informed. And a lot of people will say like, well, it's the 21st century. You should be informed already. You know, but the reality is that
it's not in our history books.
Yeah. And I think that that's kind of like, if you're using history books from maybe like the 1980s, it's different than if you're using a book from 2018, 2017, 2015, you know, even. And I think that that's kind of something that we may take as a task to inform people, you know, and there's so much misinformation as well out there.
And those of us who are willing to do that are the people who need to go to these people who are creating textbooks and all kinds of things and say, no, you need to include the story of Emmett Till. You need to include the stories of all of these different diverse people. Cesar Chavez should not only have 1 or 2 sentences in a textbook. We need to bring more awareness out there.
When you're mentioning these stories, do you mind sharing one that kind of awakened you to like the reality that, man, I actually did not know that much of X particular culture, and kind of awaken you to this reality of, wow, they only have 2 sentences there instead of like the whole background and why they're so important, in any example that you may want to give?
Wow, that's a really good question. I think about some of my Asian American friends. For example, we talk about Japanese internment camps during World War II, when President FDR was just like, well, you Japanese people over there, you're causing all kinds of problems. You might be connected to the Axis powers. We've got to get rid of you. And they put them in, if you will, for lack of a better term, a bit of a concentration camp. I don't know tons and tons about it. I don't think that they were, killing them or doing some kind of weird furnace thing like the Nazis were doing, but they definitely did separate these people. And by Reagan's administration, about 40 years later, they were paid reparations. Their families were paid that kind of money. Even then, we have the Chinese Exclusion Acts, which that was early 20th century, late 19th century, where a lot of Chinese workers were coming in. They're working on the railroads and trying to build the transcontinental railroad, all of that good stuff. And eventually people were just like, no, I don't want you people. And you people were the Chinese. Just like they made caricatures and all kinds of things for black people, they did the same thing for Chinese individuals. And they had them totally excluded, as in they could not enter the country. I feel like we don't talk about that enough. We don't talk about how today the stereotype for Asian people is that they are extremely smart, and it's always math and science. Always. And even then, we don't even include India sometimes into Asian culture. We automatically think of them as, oh, you guys are the brown people, so definitely, you're just Indian. That's it. They don't really even include them with Asians. I even have had those thoughts before when here at Southern we have Asian Night, for our Asian club, and it's one of the biggest nights of the year, and usually every year they're going to show India. And I remember one time thinking, wow, I didn't even think about them being considered a part of Asia, but obviously they're part of the continent.
I mean, it's a huge country too. Even when you think about it, it takes a big portion with China, of course, of the continent, that whole continent is like, if you put those 2 countries together, you have pretty much exclusive. I mean, you think of like the Pacific, Oceania, not to say, because a lot of people say Australia, but Oceania, that whole section is, you have India and China. They could be their own continents to a certain degree. Could,
and they have, between the 2 of them, I feel like almost the entire world's population. Yeah. A couple billion people.
And, as you're saying that, these kind of stories that you mentioned, some of them I wasn't fully aware. I mean, I kind of heard that, it's kind of like in the background. But bringing it to the foreground and maybe exploring those stories, I think it will be very interesting. Looking a little bit more in detail, what happened in the internment camps? What's the story behind that? And of course, we know war and all of those things, kind of like the general background stories. But when we bring those things to the foreground, we're able to learn so much more about what people went through there, how they, kind of endured this treatment. Which was a poor treatment, of course, a fear. But again, it kind of taps into the idea that when you're afraid of someone else, you're not willing to bring them to the table, to talk with them.
Yes. And right now, I almost feel as though, without getting into anything political, I do feel as though there's a sense of fear that is within our politics, it's within our church, within our lives every day, where we are saying now that these people are the other, whoever they might be. And we don't want to have conversations with them. We just label them with all kinds of terms. And for the Black experience, that's familiar for us. There have been times when I have walked into Walmart right here in Ooltewah, Collegedale, Tennessee, and I walked in, I got some allergy medicine, and because the lady at the cash register gave me like a lower price for it because it was on sale and some other mishap, I left with the bag and the receipt in hand, but the alarm thing started going off. And I was with another friend of mine who was Hispanic, and all the alarms started going off and they went straight to me. They didn't even go to him. But I happened to be wearing a hoodie that day. I happened to not be in my really, really nice clothing, just a hoodie and some sweatpants. And people were immediately just like, hey, I need to check your bag. And I was just like, man, my friend got literally the same exact thing. We both went there to get some allergy medicine. They didn't even take a glance at him.
And I think that really, that example speaks to the idea of the subconscious.
Yes.
And the idea that some things are really embedded. And it's not only until we have an experience that kind of detriments or kind of eradicates that barrier.
Yes.
That we're starting, not finishing, but starting to become more aware that, you know what, I don't need to profile in this case, I don't need to profile anyone. And personally, I can admit that took a long time for me. Most of the, speaking to my example, most of the things that I knew about African Americans in the past before coming to this country was they're bad, they're criminals, and that's a lot of that was in my subconscious. And then I went into LA. I lived in LA for a little bit, and I went to Crenshaw High School. I don't know if anyone listening knows what, kind of like the demographics of Crenshaw High School are, but at the time it was 85% African Americans and maybe 5% white, 5% Latino, and 5% Asian. But it was a high degree of African Americans going there. And I remember my family saying, be careful, always, be watching and stuff like that. And I mean, there are bad people in all cultures and all backgrounds. That's just the reality, But when I went there, I went with that prejudice.
Yes.
And it was hard for me not to be not afraid, But as I started to get to know people there, they were like, these are just regular teenagers, just like myself. They're going through the same issues, the same problems that I'm going through. Some of them were learning English with me because they came from African descent, they spoke French, or some of them, were Afro-Latinos and they came from a Caribbean country and they were learning English with me. I think I was blessed, especially because I learned English without ESL. So I don't think there was a budget for ESL courses at the time at the school. And we just were thrown into English 10. I was taking English, even though I didn't know how to speak, I was taking English regularly. And I think that kind of exposed me to just the regular life instead of putting me in a silo with the ESL learners, for example.
Definitely. So. And while those things are necessary, of course, at the same time, we also have to be able to balance, especially in education. That's one of the areas that I study. It's understanding that, yes, ESL and things like those are useful. But at the same time, these students on either side need to be able to have time to work together and be a community of learners together. Don't keep them in their silos forever, because then you will only grow up having misconceptions about me and what I look like. When I moved to New Mexico, I was was the first African-American person, period, that a lot of them knew personally. So some of the first questions that I got from students, from faculty and staff at the school was, so Phil, you like fried chicken? Do you like Kool-Aid? Do you like watermelon? Do you like grape soda? I bet you're good at basketball, aren't you? Even the comment by one of my friends, she thought she was being funny here, but she had said after she dropped something, she was like, Philip, pick that up. And I was just like, okay, I was already halfway down because I was just being nice and getting it. And then she said, pick that up. And I was like, wait, why? She said, because you're the slave. And I was like, wow, what is this? And people were laughing at it. And it was always, Philip, do this because you're black. And I'm like, where is it coming from? A lot of it I realized was them just because they were in the middle of New Mexico, not a lot of us were out there. The things that they would hear about me or people who look like me were through movies and television and reinforced stereotypes, which is why I'm so passionate about, now let's look at pop culture and see what you think is there, and let me show you the reality. Just like, I'll say my girlfriend is an Afro-Latina. Before, she had longer and straight hair, permed hair, for almost about 18 or so years of her life. She had never seen her natural hair pattern before. She decided to embark on a journey, and not meaning to tell her own story, but that's even within the Latin American culture of, are you necessarily Latina or are you just black? Now people look at her and they're just like, oh, you're black. And she's just like, but wait, both of my parents speak Spanish. I grew up in only my churches and my culture. And now because of my darker skin, whoa, that's our world today.
Yes, that is. And I think that speaks to the idea and to the need to have these conversations, to maybe invite somebody over for a meal with, someone that's different from you, someone that's not your same complexion, someone that is from a different ideology background. Like, we think in politics today, Republican, Democrat, or maybe libertarian, like, or even within the church, having this diversity, the way that African Americans worship, the way that Latin Americans worship, the way that Asian Americans worship, or Asian or Latin or Black or white, just maybe experience something different. And I think that that's really helpful because it helps you kind of get rid of the stereotype.
Yes.
It helps you get rid of other matters and embrace the diversity that is within.
Yeah. Unity is not conformity. When we get to heaven, I like to tell the story of when Peter, this is a made-up story, Peter is showing around any people, whether they're Adventist or just, let's just say that they are Black people. He's showing them heaven. And as he gets closer to a particular community in heaven, he turns back to the crowd and he says, guys, you're going to have to be really, really quiet here, because those are the Adventists. Those are the white people, the Asian Americans over there, whoever else over there. And they don't think anybody else is here. So we need to be very, very quiet. Understanding that our end goal in heaven is going to be the greatest multicultural, multilingual experience of all time.
Yes.
If we cannot get it together right now on this globe and just your neighbor across the street, then we're gonna have a hard time.
No, I resonate with that, and definitely think that your point is very valid, and that we need to do a better job. Talking about doing a better job as we're starting to kind of dwindle down into the podcast, the last section, how can we do that on a regular basis so that we kind of put on this project of becoming a collective us and not a we versus they mentality?
So a little bit of that, I started something when I was a student association president, and it was called This Is Us. It has nothing to do with that big show I keep hearing about. I haven't watched it for the reason of this, because it was mine first, just putting it out there. But it was helping our campus realize that at the end of the day, at the end of the year, all of us together make up our university. And so not only did I just create some ideology or a multicultural performance night, which we did, and it was fantastic, but we also started a media list. And these are for people who maybe your everyday person isn't really comfortable talking with these other people yet. And that's okay, that's understood. But you can still educate yourself by listening to podcasts like these. You can read books on different cultures. People should take the moment and read a book I recommend called The Sun Does Shine by Anthony Ray Hinton, who was a Black man who was arrested in the 80s in Alabama and tried and put on death row for a crime he did not commit at all. He stayed in jail, I think, until maybe about 2016. He lost so much of his life because he was profiled just like that. We need those real stories. We need people to read them. For me, education is the way to go. If you're not able to have a conversation with somebody, you're not free to go. You can apply yourself if you really want to learn. You can watch documentaries. You can do all those things. And if you don't want to do that, just talk to your neighbor. They'll help you out.
Well, thanks, Phil, for that. I really appreciate you saying those things, and I think all of those are very important. They really open our minds to the different possibilities that we can have. Well, thanks a bunch again. This has been a fun interview. It's been fun to talk about the different topics and different matters within diversity. So I'm really excited and talk about all the different topics within diversity. So I'm really excited about people listening to this, and I hope that if you're listening, that you make a change, that you invite somebody over, start watching things, start educating yourself for the purpose of increasing your diverse background, your diverse story.
Absolutely.
So I'm really excited. As it is our tradition here, we like to let our guests have the final word. So tell us the final word on diversity.
Well, I just want to stress to everybody that as we enter into seasons of Black History Month, or it might be Latin American Hispanic Heritage, or Asian and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, take those times, go seek out those people who are, and go hear their stories, one by one, individually. wherever they're from. Hear it, understand it, write some things down, go and read some books, immerse yourself. That is the key to understanding, including other people, and being a diverse, multicultural person.
Thank you for listening today. We appreciate that you have taken the time to listen to our podcast and ask that you share it with others. Please leave a review on iTunes or your favorite podcatching app. If you're enjoying our content, we want to invite you to consider contributing to our cause by becoming a patron, where you will receive exclusive content, have the ability to sit down with the Disruptive Adventism team, and ask relevant questions for Adventism and society. If you're interested in contributing, head to patreon.com/disruptiveadventism. Another avenue for contribution is to purchase our merchandise through Amazon or tpublic.com. You can find the links to our merchandise on our Facebook or Instagram pages. We also hope that our content has intrigued you a little bit and that you decide to stay around for future podcasts. If you have any comments, feedback, or a topic you would like us to discuss, please go to our website at www.disruptiveadventism.org or shoot us an email to disruptiveadventism@gmail.com. We're eager to engage in discussions about any matter, so don't hesitate to contact us. This has been it for today. We hope you join us next time. And as always, we invite you to be disruptive.